Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video. And in today's video, I'm going to be predicting the Adesanya versus Imavov fight. And so, if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. Obviously, if you are regular for watching my videos, this setup with the microphone may look a little bit different. I'm just testing it out. I hope it all sounds okay. It might move places and things like that, but for the moment, like I say, I'm just testing it out. But, I'm sure you don't care too much about that. Let's get into the actual fight and just a little brief kind of overview of the fighters going into this fight. Adesanya is 24-4 with 16 KOs and 0 submissions, and Imavov is 15-4 with 6 KOs and 4 submissions. This fight is a 5-round fight in the middleweight division. Adesanya's last fight was a loss via submission in round 4 versus Duplessis, and Imavov's last fight was a win via unanimous decision versus Allen. Adesanya is a southpaw. Imavov is 29 and Adesanya is 35. And to speak a bit more about what I've just been saying, like I mentioned, when you look at Adesanya's record, first of all, I'm always very happy to see Adesanya fighting. He is a fan favourite, and personally, I do like watching him as a fighter, and his reign as middleweight UFC champion was an excellent reign, and he was just, yeah, in my opinion, such an entertaining fighter. And, obviously this could be a retirement fight if he is to lose here, but I really hope he is to go on to win, but it's definitely going to be a tough matchup versus Imavov. But like I say, when you look at his record, of course he has the kind of standing out of the 0 submissions. He has said, and I listened to him on the Joe Rogan podcast, he has said that how badly he wants to get a submission, and that for himself, getting that submission would be one of the biggest things that he hasn't achieved in his career, to be completely honest. I mean, like he's mentioned, he wants it so bad. He's so eager to get it. He believes that in the UFC he will be able to get it at some point. And to be honest, it might fuel him not to retire if that is still something that's looming overhead. But it also, to an extent, might make him take a few more risks into these type of fights, because realistically he hasn't really got too much to lose in his career. I mean, obviously he's achieved so much and has been, like I mentioned, an excellent middleweight champion, but at this point, obviously he's coming off the back-to-back defeats, and obviously it's going to be very difficult. Even if he is to win this and win this convincingly, he probably won't get put in for a title shot, because there is Chimaev, of course, in the line as well. So it's gonna be a long kind of climb realistically to be able to get back to that UFC title contention. So it seems like he might have that bit more freedom about him going into a fight like this. And you've seen, if you watch his videos are always very good quality and always seem very interesting. He's been training with Robert Whittaker. That is an interesting matchup, quite a surprising matchup, but at the same time, you do kind of look at the way that they do both speak and both act, and you can see that personality is there between the two of them. They have them similarities, and they both are, just able to joke around and have fun, whilst also, of course, locking in and being excellent fighters and training so well. And so I feel like that definitely would have benefited him, being able to have that more, you know, different sparring and that UFC pedigree type sparring as well. And so that was just an interesting thing I wanted to pick up on. And another thing was the fact that he kind of plays video games in camp. He says it's to do with, helping with his hand-eye coordination and everything like that. And I suppose with every fighter, you have to have that little bits of downtime in camp where you can, of course, you're training multiple times a day, but you can also have them little recovery rest breaks where perhaps you're just sat, you're chilling. There's something there stimulating you, but it's not also pushing you too hard at the same time. And so that's just something in which I've personally never really seen a fighter touch upon how they are doing that. And yeah, just like I say, another interesting thing that Adesanya seems to do. But in general, the question that I have, and I feel like most people have coming into this fight for Adesanya, is where is his mentality at? I mean, his career as a whole has been made of quite dramatic moments. And when you look back at a few of them, you kind of look at the Paulo Costa whole kind of uh, thing that he did to him at the end of that fight. So that was a quite a big moment early on in his career. You know, he fought Anderson Silva as well, which was definitely a big moment. And then, of course, he became champion. Then, you know, also other moments such as like the Pereira loss and then the Pereira win, which was such a dramatic moment. And then even something like the press conference for the DDP fight last time, he was, of course, tearing up and everything like that. And it seems like Duplessis is just able to kind of tap into the sad parts of people's memories in these press conferences, because of course he did the same to Strickland as well. But yeah, for the most part, it seems like his career's just been made out of certain kind of highlight moments, and so I feel like that definitely does take a toll on you, because of course when you're winning and having success, all them moments are great and they're just highlights and they're amazing to see, and Adesanya had some great highlights coming up, but when you're coming back down again, it's not the great moments, it's moments going against you, and to an extent people rooting against your success because of how successful you've been. It's difficult, and I'm sure any fighter who has been at such a high level, you see that this kind of switch happens. You see that it goes from you having these great moments, which are just highlight reel moments, like getting loads of views and loads of attention, to you then kind of having the opposite things happen to you when you lose it for the first big timer. That's a huge highlight moment, and then you know if you get knocked out badly for the first time, it's again another huge highlight moment, and so it just seems like something like a Adesanya, his career has been made out of just big moments, and I'm sure, like I mentioned, that will definitely take a toll mentally on anybody. And so, yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see where his mentality is at, because he did fight very well in that last fight versus Duplessis, and he was having success, and you could argue that he was up on the scorecards, but he just got taken down. He was taking too much punishment, got taken down, and then got submitted, and again, it's going to take a lot out on you, especially when this is, you know, first of all, weird to see him on a fight night, but it's his first fight night in a long time, since Adesanya was the last time he didn't fight for a title, and this is a fight night. You know, obviously he's main eventing, so it's still 5 rounds, so it's still what he's used to in that aspect, but like I mentioned, it's just not what's been common for him in the past, what, 6 years he's been fighting for UFC titles, and you got to think that's a long time, and he has been fighting, you know, relatively regularly throughout that time, and so yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see, like I mentioned, where his mentality is at, and if the fans are still going to get behind him. Even though it's a fight night and everything like that, and are the fans still with him? Is he still a fan favorite, or have the fans kind of moved on and perhaps, you know, not rooting against him, but just wanting to see these big moments whenever he fights, but even if they aren't going in his way. But, you know, of course, like I mentioned, you have that argument of it, is he still a fan favourite? I'm not too sure. I still personally like watching him as a fighter, but like I say, I'm not too sure anymore if he is still a fan favourite and if he can still be classed as that. But he still has that name. Obviously, he has such a good resume, and he has been a champion for so long. He still has that name, and you have fighters still calling him out quite regularly, still wanting him. I mean, you think about Shara Bullet, who's also on this card, he called him out, and so there is still that want for him to be fighting, and fighters are still looking at him as, and kind of giving him and putting him on that pedestal and wanting to get to that level. But how long will that last? Like I say, I'm not too sure, and I'm sure he won't really want to fight with Magomedov at the moment. But even just mentioning something like Adesanya's name still gives you a lot of credibility. If Magomedov mentioned, for example, Tony Ferguson's name, obviously a huge name, but it wouldn't give him that level of credibility because Tony Ferguson is so much later in his career. So how much longer will the Adesanya name still be important and still gain respect in the UFC? Like I say, we'll have to wait and see. You really don't want to overstay a welcome. So if he is to lose versus Imavov, will he retire? Possibly, and I wouldn't blame him, but also at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if he wouldn't. I'm sure a lot of people have been calling for him to retire, to be completely honest, in his past few fights, but he's still been fighting for titles. And like I mentioned, that fight versus Duplessis was still a very close fight, and so I don't think he should have retired after any of them fights. I'm glad that a fight like this is happening, even though it is perhaps a bit of an unexpected matchup to see. Like I mentioned, I'm just glad that this fight is still happening, and in general, I would love to see an Oceania UFC kind of re-rise again. They seemingly are in a position right now where they have fallen off. To be completely honest, to an extent, they have fallen off. I mean, Volkanovski is still seemingly going to be getting a matchup for a rematch versus Topuria, and so they're still hoping that aspect. But you know, if it goes anything like it did the first time, it's going to be another bad moment for Volkanovski, which again I wouldn't want because I am such a big fan of Volkanovski. But you know, if Adesanya loses versus Imavov, that's a huge loss. But of course, he was a champion. Volkanovski was a champion at the same time. Robert Whittaker, he had his rise a little bit later when Adesanya and Volkanovski started dropping off and actually seemed like he was going to be able to get another title shot again. But then Chimaev shut him down. So it seems like you know it isn't always it isn't really in the best position Oceania UFC at the moment. Of course, there is a light heavyweight in which his fight in Blachowicz, his name's slipped out my mind, but that's a name in which definitely has the capabilities to be able to progress into the higher parts of the UFC light heavyweight division. But then you look, you know, other than that, Taito Avasa was another great Oceania name, and he's fallen off massively, to be completely honest, and had some big defeats. I mean, Kai Kara France has never really quite been able to reach the title contention level, especially in recent times. People are arguing that he deserves a title shot now. I'm just not too sure at the moment. So, you know, like I said, I feel like Oceania, that UFC kind of run has slowed down a bit now. Not saying it won't be able to return back to the heights in which it once was, but like I say, I feel like it has fallen off just a tad. But of course, you know, French UFC isn't really in the best position either. Imavov probably is leading the way, you got to think. And if he is to get a win here versus Adesanya, it's going to be a massive win and a win in which would, like I say, really lead the way for French UFC. And when they come back to Paris, which I don't know exactly when that would be, but I'm sure that will be soon, that could, you know, Imavov could slide straight in as another Fight Night's main event because he would be leading the way and it could have some great matchups if he is to win this fight. And you know, you look at the other French UFC fighters. I mean, Cyril Gane is still fighting at a high level and still able to have success at a high level in the heavyweight division, but at the same time, he has had some, you know, recent times where perhaps he has been exposed to not really be quite at the level in which maybe he wants to be. Of course, the John Jones loss does stand out, and obviously he hasn't fought Aspinall, but Aspinall isn't really even considering him as a fight at the moment. So yeah, and you look around elsewhere in the heavyweight division, there aren't really too many amazing matchups for him to even build his resume upon. So it's difficult for any heavyweight at the moment. So I don't really discredit Garn, but he has kind of gone off since, you know, the losses versus Francis Ngannou and then of course Jones as well. All excellent fighters, but yeah, it seemed like he has kind of dropped off maybe a little bit. We've just seen Talbot just recently. He's had quite a big career loss. He's obviously still very young, so you can't really slander him for that. But it is a big career loss very early on when he had a lot of hype and a lot of potential. Not saying he's not going to be able to get back to that point. We've obviously seen lots of UFC fighters be able to return back to a great level, and you know, Arman Sarukian was somebody who had a lot of hype behind him before he fought Gamrot and lost. So there is definitely potential to be able to get that back there, but just for the moment, he has, you know, like I say, trickled off a little bit after that loss. Saint Denis, another one, he was on a great run. Then he's again, like I say, kind of fallen off a little bit. He fought Poirier, and that was a great fight for him to be able to really prove himself and put on a great performance, but he just wasn't really quite able to do that. Then he fought Moicano and lost via doctor stoppage there as well. So it seems like the French UFC is kind of being led by Imavov at the moment. He's not really the most outspoken or I suppose entertaining of fighters, but he's got himself an excellent ranking position and he's creeping himself up through the rankings. And you know, things have definitely changed very quickly for him. I mean, when you kind of look at his record in the UFC, it's not really anything too incredible, to be completely honest. I mean, you look at the wins in which he's had. I mean, he's had that Buckley win, which was a win that aged really well. I think it was Buckley's last fight at middleweight before he went down to welterweight. So that definitely aged well for Buckley. But you also see the Strickland loss, and this was a Strickland who I believe was coming off 2 losses before that. I might be wrong, but it definitely wasn't a Strickland in the best of positions. And then for him to be able to, well, for him to lose versus him, it was, perhaps it has aged well because Strickland's gone on to achieve quite a lot since then, but it was quite a bad loss, and it definitely helped propel Strickland's career back to where it is now. And so, like I say, some of his record has been a bit hit and miss at times, but like I mentioned, he's on a very good run at the moment, and he's coming off an excellent win versus Allen, where it was a close fight. You've got to kind of accept that. The first round I did give to Allen, then the second two I did give to Imavov, and I think he found what Allen was doing, going for the double legs, and just was continuously Imavov able to just push him off when he went for the double leg and just drag him down to the ground and then get on top of him because he was putting himself in bad positions, Allen. So, you got to give him credit for seeing the weaknesses and capitalising upon them, Imavov, but this is definitely a big step up in my opinion, somebody like Brandon Allen to somebody like Israel Adesanya. Also, of course, this is a great card, to be completely honest. I mean, like I mentioned, I feel like the UFC have definitely stepped up their game with the shows in which they've been putting on, and this is no difference. I mean, it's another great Saudi card, and you look at fights like Rosenstruck versus Pavlovich. That's a definitely interesting heavyweight contest. Pavlovich has definitely dropped off since the loss versus Aspinall, and then he lost again versus Volkov, and so he's not in the best positions. Rosenstrike definitely could come in and cause an upset. Rosenstrike's been around in the UFC for quite a while and has been fighting always kind of the top guys and always causing problems, but he's always able to get the odd win, the odd loss, and so this definitely is a chance to be able to get a big win for him. The Magomedov, he's coming off a loss, but he has the potential again to be able to really flip things around and get back going to it again. Alaskarov, he's coming off that loss versus Whitaker. I don't believe he's fought since then, and that was quite a bad stoppage defeat. So he was somebody who was looking like a big risk, and when Whitaker took that fight versus Alaskarov, everybody gave Whitaker so much credit because Whitaker was much higher up in the rankings. Eliskarov was, I don't even know if he was in the top 10 or not, but he was looking, like I say, a really risky fighter to take and have to deal with, and he got dismantled. I believe it was the first round with that beautiful uppercut that Whitaker landed, so he has that redemption type arc in which Eliskarov has to go along and through now. But of course, another fight in which is on this card, which definitely has the potential to just be a brilliant contest in which is just going to showcase the most awkward and different and stylistic striking in which we may have ever seen in a contest together, and that is Magomedov versus Page. And of course, like I mentioned, these two guys are the most unorthodox but entertaining strikers in the UFC and maybe ever in the UFC, to be completely honest. I mean, Magomedov is coming off a win where he performed a double spinning back fist knockout, in which is something in which we've never seen before in the UFC, and it was just highlight reel moment. And perhaps it was a moment in which he kind of needed in his career to really propel him along, because he has been looking excellent and he's been able to get some great performances, but you've definitely seen perhaps some clear weaknesses in his game on that of the wrestling side of things, and we just really wanted to see how good his striking was and what his potential was with his striking, and he really showcased that just in that last fight alone. And Petrosian wasn't going to be an easy fight to take. Petrosian was also a very good striker as well, and I feel like perhaps the UFC have been matching him up a bit fairer against strikers instead of putting him in against a wrestler. Page, another example of a striker. So perhaps they are trying to match him up a bit nicer in that aspect, but Page is not going to be not a tough test. It's a very tough test for Magomedov, especially for his first, I believe, fight inside the rankings. And so, obviously Page is coming off his defeat versus Ian Gary, and to be fair, even his fight versus Kevin Holland was quite a close fight, and it was a striking contest in which, you know, Page was able to show what he wanted to show, but Holland, again, he has his unorthodox striking as well. So it did make for an entertaining contest, but as soon as he got taken down versus Ian Gary, well, over and over again when he was getting taken down, you could see that there was a difference level in ability there, and Page was showing up and just seemed to be able to struggle with that a lot. I think that Page is going to win via TKO in round three. I think Magomedov may be the more fluid with the kind of fast strikes, but I think Page might have the better timing. And if he can throw one of his big knees, he could really catch Magomedov off. I don't think Magomedov is always the most defensively aware. I think he can just come forward to doing the attacks that he wants, the combinations that he wants without really considering too much what might come back at him. And like I say, this is a fight in which I don't think he'll ever be able to face somebody like Page kind of before this because of how unique Page is and the way that he fights. But Page's timing is just excellent, and I believe, like I mentioned, he could definitely showcase that and get a knockout win and catch Magomedov by surprise and really just shock his momentum and really propel back his career. And so I think, like I say, Page win via TKO in round three and stop the pirate of the UFC for the moment for carrying on his excellent knockout run. Going back to the main event, of course, though, and speak about both fighters individually as fighters. Adesanya as a fighter, of course, he's got very fluid footwork, and in general, he's a very fluid fighter. That is what he's been known for. That's what he's always been able to be. That just, like I say, just very fluid fighter who can change his footwork, can switch stances, and just evade shots very well for the most part. He's very well balanced. He's accurate in his work as well. Again, it's another thing. He has that wide stance and he throws from afar, but it always seems to be quite pinpoint, quite sharp, quite like a sniper rifle type shots. He feints very well as well. He's very measured in his approach and is typically very good at finding his own range. He's fast, explosive. He's very good at also getting out of the way, to be honest. Perhaps he's running away a little bit at times, but for the most part, he is able to get out of the way of shots and avoid shots pretty well and kind of recircle back to the centre well. He changes levels very well with his kicks, and when he is able to utilize his creative striking, it is excellent to see. And like I mentioned, the striking is so varied and so good in that aspect. I would definitely say the striking is much more varied and mixed than that of Imavov's. He has very good takedown defense as well, and that's definitely something in which throughout his whole career it's been underrated, under acknowledged, underseen. His takedown defense is excellent, and even in that last fight versus Duplessis is able to get pretty much everybody to the ground with ease. But for the most part, he really struggled keeping Adesanya to the ground, getting Adesanya to the ground and then keeping him to the ground because of how well he is able to showcase his takedown defense. And again, that's linking back to his balance at the same time. He finds them openings. He's very well conditioned for the most part. To be fair, I say that, but also in that Duplessis fight, it was, of course, fought at a very high tempo, but it seems like the conditioning was. I don't know if Adesanya was struggling, but it just seemed like it was tough to be able to deal with that level of conditioning for that fight. And of course, like I say, he scrambles very well and he is able to reset and get back to the centre very nicely. Negatives about him, I think, under pressure is when, of course, he's seen to have slipped up in the past. When you look at fights, especially highlighting the one versus Strickland, as soon as he kind of got put under pressure, he got caught out. And perhaps that's because Strickland's style isn't really that much of a kind of explosive pressure type style. But like I say, it really caught him out when he did that. He has this whole thing of playing possum. He didn't utilize that too much, but he definitely has done in fights. And of course, that he had that success when he did it. Well, did it versus Pereira in that second UFC fight. But if he is making that a bit of a habit and is getting more comfortable staying on the cage without moving off, with the movement in which he does have, it's just going to kind of spell out for a disaster, to be completely honest, where he tries to play possum and then it just doesn't go his way, where he gets caught with a big shot like he did versus Strickland, and then he just actually isn't able to survive. I mean, the only reason that he was able to survive versus Strickland was because of the bell going off for the end of the round, so he got saved by the bell realistically. He doesn't always fully commit to his shots. I mean, there's definitely been times where he's coasted through rounds and just, not, like I say, not really fully gone for the work. I mean, when you look at a fight like a Cannonier fight for him, he was in such a high in his career at that point, Adesanya, and was having so much success. Here comes Cannonier, who is looking quite destructive, is looking powerful, and Adesanya does well to, nullify anything from happening, but at the same time, he doesn't really offer too much from his way as well. He doesn't really come with too many attacks in which we were used to seeing from him. And yeah, like I say, it just wasn't. It just showed that he really was just coasting through the fight and perhaps overlooking. And he definitely could be doing that here versus Imavov. Like I say, the first time since 2019 that he's not fought for a title. It wouldn't surprise me if he may be overlooking to quite a big extent. He doesn't have that level of physicality that a lot of fighters in the division have. Of course, Duplessis has it. Of course, Strickland can have it at times. Imavov, I believe, has it as well, and he just doesn't quite have that. His chin can be in the air quite a lot when he's moving around, and that has led to him getting caught with big shots in the past. He doesn't always go for counters or, you know, shorten his shots enough to go for counters. I think he can go for counters, and he perhaps might have good timing and the speed enough to be able to do it, but he just doesn't shorten his shots, and he sometimes doesn't even bother going for the counters as much. He can be too patient, too relaxed. Perhaps he's trying to, rock with this persona in which he has, which, like I say, has been a very fan-friendly persona, but it's just a bit maybe too relaxed. He can give away his back. His combination punching isn't really the best either. I think when he does get his combinations going, with the kicks getting involved and the knees getting involved and everything like that, it's nice and it's clean, and he can even land with timing sometimes his spinning back fists, but his actual combination punching I don't believe is as good as that of Imavov's. He doesn't, of course, really go for takedowns that much, and so Imavov may not have the same level of success like he did versus Allen versus Adesanya for that way. He, of course, has been hurt badly, and that's something in which Imavov has been hurt in fights, but maybe not quite to the level of that of Adesanya, and his head can be open for quite a lot of the time. I mean, the reason why he got dropped and then inevitably submitted by Duplessis was just because he was trying to run away from the cage, but he tries to do it. He stays quite upright when he's doing it, and if you can catch him out doing it and cut off the cage enough, he's not really covering up, and he is just getting caught with quite a lot of shots when he's doing that, and it's definitely a dangerous game to be playing, and it means, of course, that he did inevitably lose. Imavov as a fighter, though, in my opinion, I think he does throw better punch combinations than that of Adesanya. It's maybe not always the cleanest, but I think he's throwing it more and with more intent than that of Adesanya. He's got a very good ground and pound and was able to use that nicely versus Allen. He, like I say, capitalised on the mistakes that Allen made nicely. He can fight at the middle and in close range. I definitely think his short, powerful shots are better than that of Adesanya's. He's the more physical out of the two, and I definitely believe he could set that level of physicality versus Adesanya. He is able to drag you down. Like I say, if you go for a submission against him and are not able to get it through and just gets onto the legs and kind of looks a bit lazy whilst doing it, he will drag you down to the ground. He lets his hands go. Of course, like I mentioned, he has that good level of power. I think Adesanya still has unrespected levels of power, but Imavov, he probably also has that as well. I think his power is very good, and that physicality that he throws with is very good. Of course, he's durable. He was able to take some quite big shots in his defeats. I mean, when he was fighting Strickland, he took some quite big shots there, and I believe he's definitely a durable, tough fighter. He matches the temper of the opponent quite well and can normally, handle any kind of level of tempo in which you need to be fighting at. He does stand his ground well. He for the most part, is able to force you back, and of course, he does have that big on-rushing overhand in which he'll throw. Negatives about him, I think he can be taken down much easier than that of Adesanya, but like I mentioned, I don't think Adesanya is going to risk going for that much. I think he can give up his back when he's been taken down quite easily. He can stay on the ground. He can, well, he does have less of speed and less of movement than that of Adesanya, so maybe on paper easier to hit. He When he attempts submissions, he can often make mistakes when he's doing that, and he did versus Allen. He went for an armbar and did make a bit of a mistake, and then gave up his back at one point. He is, I believe, the less accurate out of the two. I think he can headhunt a lot more. He is much more flat-footed. He can respect too much, and I think in the opening couple rounds versus Strickland, he was really respecting Strickland, and then eventually that kind of changed, and he was often rushing in and didn't really make too much adjustments, and it did mean that he was getting caught with a lot of shots when he was walking in just to the head with Strickland's hand speed and the letting go of his hands that he was doing. Adesanya is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Imavov's going to win via TKO in round 5. Like I say, for the most part, Imavov is able to fight at whatever tempo you set, and I think he may start off slowly with Adesanya, but when he gets going, I think he's going to have the better punch combinations. I think he's going to be the more physical. I think it's going to be difficult for Adesanya to push him back, and I don't think he's going to. He might respect Adesanya's power early on, but into the later rounds, I don't think he will, and I don't think Adesanya, if Imavov gets inside, is going to have too much success unless he throws one of the flying knees. So I do believe that Imavov is able to stop late on in the fight Adesanya who has been hurt in recent times, and it's a huge win for Imavov, and to be honest, a pretty big upset at the same time, and that, like I say, could be the end of Adesanya's career if that is to happen. And like I say, personally, for a fan, I would love to see Adesanya win this fight, but I just don't necessarily know if I do see it happening. Then we could go on to fight next. Of course, Chimaev is a name, but Chimaev probably will fight a winner of Strickland versus Duplessis, and also I think with Imavov's giving up of the ground and giving up of his back at the same time, I think he could definitely have a tough night versus that of Chimaev. I just think, like I say, Adesanya's style and ability at the moment suits him better. I think Chimaev, of course, probably will fight the winner of Strickland Duplessis. The loser of that could fight Imavov, but they might want to have a bit of time out. Whittaker could be a great fight to be made. I don't really know what's happening with Whittaker at the moment. Of course, he fought it was a little while ago now against Chimaev, and a good few months ago now versus Chimaev, and obviously he had all his teeth yanked back. But now he's, like I mentioned, been back training with Adesanya again, so perhaps he's wanted to get back into training, and back into fighting. So we'll have to wait and see. Or Barrio, I think, would be a very tough contest, but realistically at the same time a very necessary contest. Barrio, I believe, is 6th in the rankings and is looking like a very big threat for the middleweight title, and definitely could be with one more win, and that one against Imavov could be it. But of course, Imavov won't bow down and won't make it easy for him. But I think that could be an excellent fight, and probably will be the fight that will be made, Imavov versus Barrio next, if he does, of course, beat Adesanya. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, need like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.